and dive in here. Sergio, let me turn it over to you. Why don't you kick things off for us?
Absolutely, Dave. So I really want this to be more of a conversation, and I want you to ask some great questions, but I thought that this is such I would say such a nuanced topic, and one it's that I think most of us in cybersecurity are aware of, but only in the periphery, that I thought I should just kind of introduce it slightly um, for everyone. Everybody's probably heard some of these terms before that are on this slide, or something like it. Um, and we have, all of these names floating around. Everything gets a name, right? Activity groups get a name, threat groups get a name. We name malware, we name vulnerabilities. Everybody's got a thing. Some people bemoan it as marketing and all this stuff. I can tell you though, first of all, I want to say that it's not marketing. It really, we can use them for marketing, but names are really important. Names have always been important in language and human society, and there's a lot of cognitive psychology and research that goes along with that understanding of how important names are to people, and why we give things name and the power you have when you name something. And so this is a common human trait, something we do for everything. And so we shouldn't expect cybersecurity to be different.
Yeah, let me just interject. First of all, Sergio, your audio level has dropped off quite a bit there when you started on this slide. So I don't know if you have the ability to up that. I think it's a little better. Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
There we go.
I just interject my own perspective here, which is that I find myself being the person who has to pronounce some of these names that things are given, and they're given. Sometimes I wonder, when someone typed in that name, did they ever consider that someone's actually going to have to say it out loud? And the other thing that happens is very often things will come up, well, they'll have multiple names depending on who you ask. Different organizations will give them different names. Absolutely. So we'll often say, well, this is APT 72, also known as fuzzy octopus, also known as, resistant ostrich, and so.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So that's a great question. It's one I get all the time. It's a frustrating thing for us in the community that deal with these names, that have to name things and things like that. And I absolutely get the frustration. I recognize and sympathize with everybody because I have to deal with it too. First of all, I really struggle. I don't struggle. I try to communicate to a lot of folks of how important it is to give things names that are pronounceable. Some folks are not good at that, and that's actually one of my elements of naming, is you got to be able to pronounce it simply. And that actually gets away from a lot of very scientific naming, which some people try to use. They'll use like the scientific names for flowers or things like that to name things. It gets crazy when you get into very odd Latin and Greek roots. So I try not to do that. But I think from a naming perspective, the thing from a community is that it's important to realize that we don't have a common naming scheme, and we will never have a common naming scheme. And the reason for it is that we are not actually naming the same thing. And I know that sounds really weird, but it's actually the truth. So if we go down to, this is exactly this next slide, which is, what if I told you it isn't about the names, right? That the names are just a label on when you see something like, Xenotime, it's the most, what we at Dragos say is the most dangerous dangerous hackers targeting U.S. utilities and oil and gas in the world. What does it mean when we say Xenotime? Is this the name of a person? Is it is it the hacker known as, as 4chan or something like that? And the answer is no, it's not. We go back to the diamond model, and you can go to diamondmodel.org if anyone's not familiar with it and see the material. But fundamentally, right, there's a group of things that make up every bad thing that happens. And that is fundamentally a bad person, an adversary, targeting a victim. So you got to have a victim. Otherwise, what's bad thing? It doesn't matter. They got to have a capability, a way of doing it, and they have to have infrastructure, which is a way of doing it across, right, or through. And that could be a USB key. It could be a piece of software. It could be a VPN connection or what have you. So all of that, right, is the fundamental components. Now, when you take all of this together and you say, hey, okay, I've got bad thing happening on my network. And then you're like, okay, well, for those who are probably in this channel familiar with the kill chain, the very basics of there's a group or phasing of activity that occurs. And then of course we have the attack graph, right, which is from MITRE, and it's the behaviors of the adversary. Well, what happens when you kind of bring all of that together and you kind of mix it around, right? Well, you end up with a very complicated idea of what behavior is. And we end up with this thing called activity groups. And so really, Dave, when you're talking about different names, what we are really discussing are the different models people are using to combine activity together. And so, for instance, I might call something Xenotime, and another company might call it, Fuzzy Snuggly Duck, right? And we're, my IP address that is conducting the malicious activity might be the same as their IP address conducting malicious activity. But the malware I see might be very different than the malware they see. But yet we agree, hey, there's something related here. There's something in common. But yet we see different things. I don't have the same visibility maybe another company does or another organization does in the world. They might see different behaviors in the world. And so fundamentally, these labels are unique to the organization because they're unique to your analysis. They're unique to what you see. I might disagree with them that one piece of malware is not actually what they think it is, right? That is a very common thing in our world where we're like, oh, well, yeah, that we've seen that too, but we don't think it's part of this. I mean, that's the kind of argument I get involved in at the bar all the time. And so we're really naming different things because these are really not going to be the same for everybody. And so we label them differently. And so we can say that two things are related. We can say that, Fancy Bear and APT 29 or 28 are, related. We can say they're associated. We can say they have overlaps. But you can't fundamentally say they're the same thing. Because to do that, to say something is the same means a lot more than just saying there's correlation between something. So this is what we talk about. And so we create these things called activity groups and we give them cool names. Why? Because, I mean, there's got to be some enjoyment in life. So, we might as well do something fun, if we're dealing with bad stuff all day long. And fundamentally, though, the cool thing is that there's an actual life cycle to this. It's not just like fire and forget. There is, first of all, like the reason you create a group, the reason you want to do this is because you want to answer a question, a problem. We don't just create groups to create groups. We classify things in our daily life into groups, right? I might not know what kind of tree that is, but I know it's a tree. I know it belongs into the group of trees, right? And I know it's got leaves and it's got roots and it's got made of wood. And I know I probably shouldn't run my car into it, right? So I don't need to know exactly what kind of tree it is in order to know I shouldn't run my car into that. And so that's an example of where in everyday life, we classify and group things together in order to achieve an easier, honestly, just a quicker and easier mental picture of the world. So we can take action more efficiently and effectively. Well, we do the exact same thing in cybersecurity. We group things together, we correlate activity together so that we can then take a step back and say, I don't give a crap if that, what the file hash of that piece of malware is. I just care what type of malware that is, right? So we can then continue to step back and take more strategic, defensive, and mitigative approaches. So the first thing you've got to do is be like, well, why am I grouping this together, right? We got to have a problem. Am I doing it because I need to know what the most common, maybe I'm looking for a common malware author. That's a very normal thing to be looking for. There are malware dev shops all over the world and they'll write malware, or there's malware authors who will write you malware on demand, right? You just pay them, basically contractors. And so we can find people that way, right? We can identify commonalities in malware and we can find them. And this is one way we group. Another way we group is we can group based on the fundamental behaviors of activities. We can say, hey, this activity and this activity, they might not be caused by the same thing, but they are fundamentally the same thing. Two different pieces of ransomware, for instance, might not be written by the same people, might not be operated by the same people, may not even be targeting the same people. These are very separate things, but yet they are overlapping and similar and correlated in a way that we can group them together to say, hey, I can take just one cybersecurity action, and then I can then take, I can mitigate two different threats instead of having to do it against each one individually. So again, these are examples of where we use grouping every day. And in the diamond model, I just created this concept of an activity group. It's a name of, why and how we group things together. So the first thing you do is you start with a problem. And the next thing you have to do, which is that one that we all argue about, is the feature selection, which is, okay, well, what belongs in the group and what doesn't? Because not everything can go into the group. Otherwise, you have a group of all things. And of course, you can't have nothing in the group. Otherwise, you have a group of zero. And so you're going to have to pick and choose. And there's going to be arguments. And it's going to be very based on your visibility, based on your own analytic needs, based on your own background and experience. And then once you do that, then you create your group. And you're like, oh, hey, well, now what fits in there, right? You can start dropping stuff into the baskets. And then, of course, as time goes on, you're like, oh, well, I just saw a new thing. Did that new thing belong to this group or that group? And we can grow the group over time. And then the last one, then we ask the question, what do I know now? After doing all this work, dumping all this stuff into baskets, what do I do, right? What do I know and what can I do about it? The challenge we have though is that's where it starts for most people, man. Like they think like you create a group and it's done, like ABT 28, but it's not. In fact, the hard part just begins because now things change over time. And now you have to accept that you may have to redefine groups. What was correlated before may not be correlated now. You may have screwed it up and correlated something into the group that was actually not part of the group as you learn something new, and you have to regroup things together. There's a lot of reasons. And so there is a retirement also to groups, right? Things go away and it's okay. That's a normal thing. And so in grouping, we have to accept that things change and move on. So what was always one thing it doesn't always continue into the future.
Yeah, it makes me think of, sort of if I have an infestation of insects in my house, like, are they flying insects or are they burrowing insects? You see, oh, well, they're burrowing insects. Well, are they ants? Well, are they fire ants or are they carpenter ants? Or are they, and so that could all lead me to different methods of treatment or, do I put food away or do I hit them with chemicals? What kind of expert do I need to bring in, or do I actually have raccoons in the attic?
Right, exactly.
What's the difference? Yeah. Yep. Interesting.
So grouping is a normal cognitive function of humans. We use it for cyber threats. We just put names to it, but we do that for lots of things in our lives, right? Trees, we know the word tree. It's a name for a group of things. And so that's so this is a very normal thing for people. And so we could, of course, try to do things better. The scientific community, of course, came up with a taxonomy that they use. We could try in the cybersecurity community to do that. We are working on that, of course, through like MITRE. The MITRE attack framework is an exactly amazing opportunity for the community to get together to create a taxonomy of behaviors. So this is kind of what it looks like, right? It's kind of messy. You take on the left here, you got all of this stuff happening, right? Lots of events, lots of bad things, lots of intrusions. And then you got this, like what I call the activity group creation function. And what that is it's just like, hey, I want to group things that are IP address ABCD. And I want to only group things that that do this, this, and this. And I'm going to say that's the same thing that I care about for a reason. And then I just start creating groups off of that. And some things create groups and some things don't. We call those outliers, right? And those things are just the things that don't fall into those groups. And we can do this as many times as we want, as often as we need to. So one thing I don't like about what most people think are groups are like this permanent thing. Like you give it a name, it's always going to be a name. It's always going to be that thing and it can never change and all that. It's like, no. That's a bad way of doing analysis because I like to say that analysis necessarily creates baggage. You create knowledge baggage, right? Which is, this is the way I know things work. Well, when you do that, you create biases, right? Because you get confirmation bias in there, mirror imaging bias in there, and all that stuff. And so when you get to a point where our cybersecurity community thinks that we have these permanent structures set in stone, we immediately become a worse community than we were before. Because then we've now introduced a whole bunch of problems into our ability to think and be creative about how we solve the problems that are in front of us. And so I like to really hit hard on that idea of you have to have this idea of names and groups that have to be very fluid, and they have to work with what you want. Groups are not defined by the adversary. Groups are defined by defenders. And so defenders are in control. Don't let adversaries be in control of what you name and how you organize things, right? That you're just giving the adversary more control than you need to. So retain control of what you can, because we don't have a lot of things we can control. So what does this get us all down to, right? Which is, why the heck do activity groups matter? Well, for two reasons: detection and mitigation. I like to say that I go back to one of my old managers, John Lambert over at Microsoft, right? One of the security GMs at Microsoft, amazingly smart guy. And I had a privilege of working with him. And one of the things that I loved is he used the words classes and physics. And he said, look, he's like, we'll never win by having to collect 1 million MD5 hashes a day. He's like, that's a horrible way of doing cybersecurity. He's like, we have to think in terms of creating classes of threats and controlling the physics of our environments. Because at that point, you can do big things, and you can be scalable, and you can be efficient. Because we're not going to be able to hire our way out of this problem. We're not going to be able to just build databases to solve our problems here. And so really, this gets us down to grouping is the ability to create classes and the ability to understand what are the levers in our physics, what controls can we apply in our environments, which modify the behaviors of these activities. If I do this, if I turn off SMB version 1, right, then I've controlled the physics of my environment. I've entirely removed an entire class of threat and an entire class of protocol off of my network. And so those are the types of things we need to start considering and moving towards. And that's one thing that activity groups do for us. And that's why they're so valuable. So we could get then into bigger ideas, right? Which are what I call activity group families. And here I'm going to use and pick on CrowdStrike a little bit. Love CrowdStrike to death, but we talked. They love the pandas and the bears, and it's fine. But what they're really doing is they're creating families. They're saying, hey, these various activities fall within this other group, this broader set, and we call those activity group families. And so you can then create groups, of course, and get to further and further abstractions, right, as to what things are. Now, CrowdStrike makes the assertion that their groups are based on attribution, and so whatever is panda is China, whatever is bear is Russia, and so forth, right? So that's their thing. And so that gets us now to attribution, which is what most people think of when they come to groups. Because when I say fancy bear, immediately people are like, oh, that's the Russians. And that's a completely fine way of doing business. But just realize that not everybody does it that way, nor do you have to do it that way. That's just one of the 177 different ways of grouping activity together in a very broad sense. And so that's just one method of analysis. So activity groups are not necessarily equal to attribution. Some people use it that way, and that's fine, but that's not the way that they are all done. In addition to that, I can tell you that the way most people use activity groups is just straight wrong. And the reason it's wrong is because threats are more complicated than what most people give them credit for. I've been involved on the offensive side, and I can tell you that it is a very, very complicated world out there. It's much more complicated than most defenders give it credit for. And so, for instance, in industrial control environments, one thing that we are unfortunately blessed with is a very complicated threat environment, meaning that these environments are very difficult to get access to generally. They're very difficult to cause effects inside of, and they take a long time and a lot of resources to do it. And so countries actually will start working together to do it. Now, what if I told you that multiple bears and multiple other things, right, were working together in a single intrusion in a cohesive way, right? They were literally installing each other's tools, walking in and out of the environment, it's like a what we call a party box, actually, in my world, in threat intel we call that the party box. Everybody's here to party, right? And the problem with that is that you can't just throw a label on it. You can't just say, oh, well, that's this and this is that and that's it, because it becomes, we're looking at it from such a narrow lens of the world that to say that ignores like the reality of the situation. You just, at that point, you're enforcing reductionism on a problem that is not reductionist in nature. And so fundamentally there, right, our goal is to understand how all of these things interact. And so when somebody comes up to me and like, hey, this group, blah, this country broke into this electric plant or whatever, I'm like, are you sure about that? Are you sure that was the whole story? Because just because you saw a single IP address associated with a group that you had previously been labeled as whatever, you now basically said the whole thing is this. And it's like, well, there's a lot more here that needs to be uncovered, and that's a good hypothesis, but that's not yet a conclusion. And a lot of and this is what we get to here, which is the last point, which is there's soft attribution and hard attribution. Soft attribution is where you use abduction and induction, where you're basically assuming facts not yet in evidence to get to your conclusion or to understand what you see in front of you. Hard attribution is where you use deduction, where you have direct facts of attribution. An IP address previously associated with Fancy Bear is not attribution to the Russians. I'm sorry, it's not good enough. Writing a Wall Street Journal article that says the Russians attacked us because it was an IP address that was previously associated with Fancy Bear is nothing but stupidity, right? These words have meaning, right? I've been involved at the national security level for almost my entire professional life, and I can tell you that people care about what they read in the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times and the Washington Post and USA Today and so forth, and so because of that, these words have meaning, and to be unnecessarily inflammatory from a cybersecurity perspective when you actually don't know if it's the Russians, and you say that out loud, and then you get a whole bunch of people reading it, that people will use that, and maybe for very bad things. Unfortunately, at the National Security Agency, right, I was involved in a lot of things where there were life and death consequences to analytic decisions you made, right, especially in counterterrorism. You say something, bombs might fall. So analysts need to recognize very quickly that they have an ethical and moral duty to how they say things and when they say things and what they say exactly. And so I think we play loose and fast with a lot of stuff that isn't really deductive logic, but is really just hypotheses that we have yet to prove, which are fine, but don't just come out and say their conclusions. So that's my soapbox on attribution, which is attribution is fine. We can do attribution. I've done attribution in my life. I have identified people. I've identified their families. I've identified where they live. I know what days and weeks of, days of the hours they're in. I've used, imagery analysis. I've used, all of the mechanisms of state intelligence to, identify things. And I can tell you that attribution is really cool and really awesome and really powerful. But it's not the attribution most people do. And so just be very careful out there with what that is. And so at Dragos, yeah, go for it.
Yeah, I was going to say, can I give just maybe some soft pushback, not some hard pushback, but some soft pushback, because
I love it.
Like something that I find in our own reporting, for example, when Dragos comes out with a report on something, we will often find ourselves saying, Dragos does not do attribution. However, organization B and C have said it's the Russians. Yep. So can you give us some insight on why is there a deliberate choice on your organization's part to not do that attribution? And then I have a follow-up question after you answer that.
Absolutely. So I choose not to say what I don't know. If I had attribution, if I knew like a person who did it, I would absolutely say it. Dragos would absolutely say it. But the fact is we don't. And in me saying something like this is
so wait, do you not know, or is it unknowable?
Oh no, it's definitely knowable. You just have to have the right data, and honestly the majority of companies in the world do not have the right data to do that kind of work. And we just are honest in saying, nope, we can't, if we don't do it, we're not doing it. So.
Okay. What about what I've heard some people say, I've heard the phrase attribution doesn't matter. It doesn't matter who did this. It's the thing that's being done that matters. What's your take on that?
Yeah, attribution does matter. I've used it successfully. You can see based on indictments around the world, based on both hard and soft power elements being used between states, that attribution absolutely does matter. It's a lever we can use to enforce norms or to establish norms. So for instance, if you don't know who's using chemical weapons, let's put it this way, protecting yourself against a chemical weapon is important. Knowing who's using chemical weapons is also important. It's the same thing in cyberspace, right? But they are not the same thing. Knowing who did it and being able to protect yourself tactically against it are very different questions. And so I think that most people get confused when they say that attribution matters, when really the answer is it does matter, but it only matters in certain contexts. But it's the same thing of IP addresses matter, but they also don't matter in all contexts. And so the answer is that it's the right thing at the right time for the right context, not all things all the time.
Okay.
Yeah. It is a great question. These are really hard things for our community to get. Yeah, they're very complex. They're not something you can boil down to a single tweet, for instance. So.
Right. Yeah, I also wonder, I mean, getting back a little bit to that naming thing, which is, I think, obviously there's that natural impulse to want to name things. As you said earlier, that's our human nature. We want to put names on things. But I wonder, even with grouping, where we'll say, I mean, we do it with other things. We have the Five Eyes. Yeah. We have the European Union, ways of putting names on groups of people. So I can see that, when the pandas and the bears team up, and now we come up with a new name for those when they team up together, there's a convenient label to put on them as well, right? I don't know what we call them, but
yeah, exactly.
The platypuses, I don't know.
And no, we would absolutely name it.
Right.
We would. And at Dragos, that's what we do, right? In the industrial space, the names we give things are the activities, not the adversaries. And so, for instance, Xenotime may actually be more than one group behind it. So it's actually the amalgamation of multiple groups working together. It's the combined activity of how they break in and they attack and try to disable safety systems. It's not group A, group B, group C, and I've got 3 different groups now that I'm trying to figure out where they're playing. It's like, no, I'm trying to defend an oil refinery against this type of behavior. And that's all I care about right now. And so I'm going to group that behavior together so I can establish defenses. Yeah. Really, really good question, Dave. So, like, just to throw our own stuff under the bus here, right? These are names that we give things, right? We've chosen rare earth minerals as a naming scheme. I think that, it's one of the hardest things I've ever done in my life is give things names. It sounds really weird. First of all, it can't be copyrighted or trademarked. Then you get in other trouble. It can't be too complicated to say. And it can't be socially, religiously, or culturally insensitive. So for instance, I wouldn't use like Hindu names of gods, which some people do. And I'm like, why? I would never think about doing something like that. And so when you start paring down like all the ways you would name things, you're like, oh boy, like there's not a lot left. And so, and even when you look at the scientific names of things, then you get, like I said earlier, you get these wicked, Latin and Greek roots that become complicated. And so we chose a very simple naming scheme, which is rare earth minerals. And really, again, here you see, based on the descriptions on the screen, we use the diamond model. We use modes of operation, right? Which are what types of ICS kind of activity are they conducting? We use capabilities. Those are your behaviors and your tools. We use victimologies, like what types of victims do they tend to go after? They may not be their entire set of victims, but we try to say, okay, if we had to classify groups of victims together, how would we do that? And this is, of course, important when we say, hey, Xenotime is a really important threat against oil and gas refineries. And then all of a sudden in 18, we were like, oh, well, now they're going after against electric. We didn't see that before. That's interesting, right? And so that's important for the cyber defense community, because now it's not just the oil and gas refineries that need to protect themselves. The electric sector needs to protect themselves against this too. And some people might ask, well, why weren't they doing it before? Well, we all know the answer to that, which is you only have a limited set of resources. You have to kind of pick and choose what threats you're going to defend yourself against. And so, that's why threat intelligence and activity groups are important, because we can group things together and then we can start watching changes over time, and then making and suggesting cyber defense positions and activity because of that. And so here you can see we make links down below to other groups in the world. A good threat intelligence analyst should tell people when there are overlaps and correlations with other work that other analysts have done in the world. We aren't in a bubble. We should try to contribute to the world's, the world's body of knowledge, not act like a silo. So we actively try to, point out where there are areas where there might be linkages, and other analysts can go and prove or disprove those associations. And so when we say that, again, back to my previous point, we say the word links, right? Which is there's some relationship here. It might just be an IP address sharing, right? And that might just come from a CDN for all we know. We try to do better than that, of course. Like, it's not just anything and everything. We try to put more rigor into it. But that we basically just say, hey, there is overlap. We see that there is a correlation here, and but we don't know how tight or important or overlapping this really is. But it's important for everybody in the cybersecurity community to know that. And then, of course, like I said, as we learn more knowledge or other people add to our knowledge, then we can build on that. So that's kind of what activity groups are 101 and why we use them, and why they're important. And yeah, Dave, man, you and me, man, like the number of spreadsheets I have with everybody's names and all, oh my God. So I get that. I get the frustration with everybody on there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, do you suppose that is there a desire, or is it an inevitability that someone's going to end up being in charge of the names at some point? Will there be a federal organization, or somebody becomes the alpha for who gets to be the final arbiter of that?
Yep. So I can tell you, in the U.S. government, I tried to do it for 10 years, and that didn't work. Lots of different organizations tried, and they couldn't even get it done. Not to say that the U.S. government is the pinnacle of organizational excellence, but but they tried. And what I can say is that in my career, right, one of the things that's important in my career is I can at least see failure and I can try to avoid it. And I can tell you that based on the experiences of a decade trying to make that happen, I can tell you that I think that the fundamentals are much different than just a naming scheme. It comes down to the different visibility, the different analytic models that people are using, the different biases involved in different organizations and different teams. There's a lot of cognitive psychology going into this that is a lot more complicated than just a naming schema.
All right, well, we've got some good questions here from some of our participants here. I'm going to start with this one. Should the onus of the threat intelligence community shift to a standardization of focusing on the malware, its target impact, and less on attribution, considering attribution tends to be the hardest, as well as providing a sense of plausible deniability?
Yeah, that's an excellent question. And that was very well phrased and very well articulated. I gotta say, I gotta give you a lot of credit for that. It's an excellent, excellent question. Yes, I think to some extent, yes. Attribution is important, as I mentioned. It's important if we are going to establish and enforce norms of behavior across the internet. Absolutely. If anybody and anyone can do anything they want on the internet, we'll never be able to have a safe and open and a reliable place to do business and conduct human activity. So that's important, right? I also work in human trafficking on the internet, and not the QAnon crap that you see, but actual, like, real life labor trafficking and stuff like that. And I can tell you that that in that world, it's very important. Attribution is very important, because that's how we would stop anybody from doing things, right? And so it is important, but it's not important for everybody. And so I would say that most people in the cyber defense community don't need to know or understand or use attribution. Is it cool? Yes. Do I like reading spy novels? Absolutely. So I have no problems with like the interest people have in the community for around that stuff. That's a fine thing. But from a defensive perspective, getting our job done and making the world safer, you're absolutely right in your question that we need to be thinking of behaviors and physics, right? Malware is nothing other than the exploitation of the physics that we've implemented in our environment. Back to John Lambert before, right? A dude's a font of wisdom, right? He said to me, Sergio, nobody can do anything on your network except that which you let them. And I was like, hell, that is amazing. That is like revelatory for me. I was like, you're right. We control everything on our network. Now that doesn't mean we could do anything. We have other factors involved, but you're right. And so your question here is perfect, is that we need to get further down into understanding the physics of what we have and what we can control, and understanding the physics of the bad guys and what they're trying to exploit against us. And that's how we actually achieve true defense. So I love the question. Great job.
Here's another question that I really like, because I think it's one of those really, practical, meanwhile, back in the real world questions. And it's this: how do you explain to the CEO whose first question is, who's attacking us?
Absolutely. And the answer is that is a question I have to answer on a daily basis because people always want to know, right? Who done it? And yet, unfortunately, it is one of the last things that as an analyst you generally know. And so my answer to the CEO is, I will let you know when we find out. And the answer to them is, like any law enforcement or other type of action, generally figuring out who did something is one of the last things we understand. And this might take time to figure that out, but we will let you know when it happens. And that's
is it also a matter of properly setting expectations ahead of time?
Absolutely. It is. And a lot of people don't know what questions they can ask an analyst, or what is within the realm of possibility. And so the answer is, with any sort of intelligence, I like to say intelligence is a 50-50 problem. 50% of intelligence is the producer, the person who's building and giving intelligence, and 50% of the intelligence problem is the consumer, the person who needs to use it, like the CEO. And so there's no intelligence problem that lands on one side or the other. It's always both sides of the coin. And so the producer needs to understand what your consumer wants to know, needs to know, or how they want to know it. And they have to work on that. And then the consumer has to be trained, educated enough, is I guess a better way we put it, educated enough to understand what is being given and how it's given and why it's given that way. I had the fortunate time of presenting many opportunities to presidents and secretaries of cabinet and so forth, and all across, and not only in the US, but all over the world. And I can tell you that you spend a lot of time as an intelligence professional helping your customer understand what you can do and why you do it and how you do it, so that they then understand how to take advantage of what you've got. And it's not an easy thing, and it's not just a checkbox, and it's not just a PDF report. There's a lot that goes into making this happen, because again, I could produce the best intel in the world, but if the person I give it to doesn't know how to use it, what's the point of me doing it? And so it takes both sides of this coin. So absolutely. It's a great question for your CEO to ask. There's no bad questions to an intel analyst. But as an intel analyst, you should both inform and educate as much as you can at the same time.
All right, our next question here is, how can an analyst learn to differentiate data feeds, in quotes, versus what is real threat intelligence focused on ICS?
Oh, great question. So data is not intelligence, first of all. And there's a couple of ways you can differentiate the two. If you can take immediate action in your environment on something, then it's generally considered a type of intelligence. If I put a whole bunch of file hashes inside of a list and I say bad list.txt, and I send it to you, it'd be like, hey, these are bad malware hashes. I've given you intelligence. I've contextualized the data for you such that you understand what I understand about the data, which is these file hashes are bad and I should probably do something about it. That is intelligence. It's not the intelligence, and so there's a lot of levels of that. It goes all the way up to the strategic intelligence of what are the Russians doing against the US electric grid. And so intelligence goes up. So really data though, is really the fundamental elements that need to, that you then transform by adding context to it. Without, if all I've got is a file hash feed, that's not intelligence. If my file hash feed is telling me this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad, it's giving me like relevance indicators or something like that, confidence indicators, that's an intelligence feed. It may not be what you need, and you may have to refine it and enrich it even further. Just because you get intelligence doesn't mean it's ready for you to use. But so I think that's really the fundamental question is, your question should really be, what's the difference between data and intelligence? More the question is, when I get intelligence, how do I evaluate whether that intelligence is ready for me to use? And the real simple answer to that is it going to cost you more than it saves you? If intelligence makes you a better decision maker, makes you faster, makes you more efficient, makes you save money, whatever your fundamentals of your business are, then it's good enough intelligence for you. If it generates 1,000 alerts that now you have to follow up every day and you can't get to that report you've got to write once a week for your boss and you might get fired, that's not good intelligence for you. So that is really the fundamental thing of understanding when intelligence is good and bad. And that's how we do it in ICS is, am I fundamentally helping the defender? Am I making their job easier and better and faster? Or am I causing them more issues than I'm solving? And that's just really the very simple barometer we use.
All right, here's another interesting one. Do you think there's a potential solution for the issue of attribution and punitive action in international activity? It seems like no matter the published data or claims, the nations most benefiting from an attack or campaign of cyber activity will simply dismiss or deny any claims of attribution against them or companies, groups within their borders in order to ensure any punitive action is either muted or can be labeled as deceitful and inherently political. Do you think there's any long-term prospects for being able to make hard attribution and ensuring punitive action possible in the world today?
Ding, am I writing your PhD thesis? Because this is a great question. This is amazing, actually. So I am fortunate enough to serve on the experts panel at the International Committee of Human Rights in Geneva. I'm sorry, the International Committee of the Red Cross on their cybersecurity and cyber threats to humanitarian issues. And this is the exact question that we address all the time. And we are trying to get to an answer to that. And the answer to your question is we don't know yet. And does this fit within the current legal or international space or international powers space where we can utilize bilateral or multilateral relationships or elements of state power to change and modify behavior on the internet? Especially given what you said, which is the challenges of attribution, deniability, covert and clandestine activity, and so forth. I think Dave and I had a conversation before this webinar about false flags. And the question is a great question. This is some people laugh at it. I even do sometimes because false flags are so rare and so complicated and so hard to pull off that
but they're so sexy.
They're
awesome.
So
sexy, Sergio. They're so sexy.
I love it. But if you look in the annals of history, how often they've been pulled off to success is just so rare that countries know this. They know that that is generally not the best path forward. And most people don't understand the difference between clandestine, covert, and false flag operations. Where a lot of stuff you see is either clandestine or covert. It's not false flag. Just because you're trying to hide your ability doesn't mean you're trying to necessarily pin it on somebody else. Just like if a Chinese malware author used Cyrillic, doesn't mean they're trying to blame the Russians. They're just trying to hide themselves from the activity. So those are two very different things in our world. And it gets to this person's excellent question, which is that is that enough? Then could we demarche the Chinese government? Or if I saw a piece of malware with Cyrillic language, is that enough for me to establish punitive say, actions against the Russians? The answer is probably not. We need a lot more than that. One thing that the U.S. government is attempting to accomplish, the Germans, the Brits, the Australians, a bunch of countries in the world are trying to do this, which is trying to use the criminal justice system as a means to establish attribution and then gain credence and credibility in the international community to drive punitive action. And so what they're saying is, hey, we aren't just going to drop a whole bunch of stuff in the UN Security Committee and you know, in a presentation and be like, now we all need to go to war against Russia, right? That's probably not the right way we accomplish this cyber attribution and response approach. What we should probably do is use our existing justice systems to establish a burden of prove our cases effectively, and then utilize multilateral relationships to then establish a coalition of cause and effect that we want to then go and use, because it's not just going to be one country working against another. And so your answer to your question is really simple. We don't know. There's a lot of countries trying to do different things. I do believe it's possible, but we don't know yet what the right path of doing that is.
All right, we've got time for just a couple more questions here. This is an interesting one. In the late 1800s, train robbing became legion. They were stopped not by getting better at defense, but instead by going after the train robbers. Yep. When do we go on the offense? What criteria are sufficient to take the response kinetic?
Wow.
Yeah, wow, indeed.
That is a very challenging question. It induces a whole lot of legal, ethical, moral questions in that, what you imply in that question. And of course, the question of how far you go kinetic is another one, right? We have a whole escalating use of force, both domestically, internationally, and so forth that we can leverage here. So arresting somebody is a kinetic action that's a use of force. Obviously, dropping bombs on people is another kinetic action and use of force. I do not believe that the harm to personal property or business property is a justification for death, or I don't believe that's a death penalty. I don't believe we should be dropping bombs on people if they hack into a bank, for instance. I just don't believe that we should kill people for that reason. I'm not, of course, you know, there are other people who disagree with me. But we do have I do believe you are right in that we have to get to a point where there are physical ramifications for your activities on the internet. A good modern use case for that is, of course, child exploitative material, or you know, SAM material, or however you want to call it, right? Child abuse material, or so forth. That is something we've done a pretty good job of managing on the internet. God, we've got a long way to go, so please don't you know, take me as we've solved the problem here. But compared to where I remember in 1994, right, being on user groups and news groups where that shit was just everywhere. Like literally, I would just log into a news group and I would see, and I can never get that stuff out of my brain. Okay, I remember this stuff. It's very, very bad. To where now, if I wanted to find it, I would have to know where to go. It's not just everywhere and anywhere. And that we have taken action where it is more punitive and people are more afraid of what's happening against them. So I do believe that we have taken steps to achieve what you're looking for. And I do believe it hasn't caused us to drop bombs on people, which is good. So I think that there is an opportunity here, but I do believe we should use it. We should use our existing legal and justice systems and frameworks to do it properly. But I do believe we will get there. And very much like the last question, it's just going to take a lot of trial and error to figure out what the right approach to doing that is.
Yeah. All right, I think we have time for one more question here. Here's a good one. It says, it seems like the threat activity groups must have people with a lot of specific experience in order to successfully complete an attack. In other words, an attack against the FCC unit in a refinery must involve someone very familiar with the operation, the control loop, and the process parameters. Can these particular skills be used for attribution, or at least reduce the possibilities?
Absolutely can. Yes, that is the ability, that is basic criminology 101, right? Criminology is, by the way, like a lot of people watch too much NCIS and so forth. When you actually read criminology and the fundamentals and basics, it's a very difficult thing. It's a very soft science, right? It's trying to match a whole bunch of stuff together. And cyber threat intelligence is very much like criminology and cybersecurity. It's trying to apply some really fuzzy and complex things and trying to understand human behavior amongst all of this technical activity. So in that space, the answer is absolutely we can. We at Dragos, our best assessment, our best hypothesis is that there are between 20 and 30 states that are currently in operational phases of ICS activity. And those are states that have put in the time and money and resources, either bought it, recruited it, or built it, of course, natively, and are in that space and actively able to compromise and probably at this point only compromise ICS environments. Then when you get to the question of control loops, managing outcomes, what we call effects operations, I can log into an industrial environment, I can push buttons on an HMI. Something might happen, something might not happen. The difference between somebody trying something and somebody who actually knows what the outcome is, I like to say deterministic and indeterministic actors, is what this person is asking a question about, is that there are probably only about 7 or 8 states in the world that are actually at the level of determinism, where they know enough, they've recruited engineers, maybe they're utilizing national laboratory type of apertures or infrastructure around their countries. And we can, and we know that they're really working hard and they're using physicists and control engineers and so forth to help do their work. This is also a reason why we know there aren't a lot of criminals in this space. Not yet. There's some ransomware. It's poked around. It's tried a few things. It might grow. I like to say I'm as good of a predictor of the future as anybody else in the world. So my predictions are just as bad as anybody's. And so I don't know if that'll grow, but from a criminal perspective, we know that it's just right now too hard. The industrial space is just too difficult for criminal actors to target. We see a lot of overlap though in terms of like ransomware accidentally crossing over, or viruses or malware crossing over accidentally. And so we do have to manage that, and that is a real cybersecurity risk for operational technology and taking down a manufacturing plant. But right now we aren't seeing a lot of criminal targeting over it. So the person's absolutely right. We can use that to at least narrow the world of possibility.
All right. Well, with that, I believe we are coming to the close of our scheduled time here. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. I want to thank Sergio for participating, and all the folks at Dragos for making this possible. It's been my pleasure to be a part of it. As we said, this will be available online in the next few days. So if you're interested in revisiting it or sharing it with your colleagues, we would love for you to do that. And of course, if you have any additional questions, please reach out to the folks at Dragos. I'm sure they would love to follow up with you after the webinar.
Yeah, Dave, I will, if I could just say, I will take all of these questions, and I will actually answer them all in a blog post later. So I like to do that with every webinar. So if you have a question in here, go ahead and drop it in the chat, and I'll try to address it for you in a blog post.
All right, terrific. So with that, I'm going to say goodbye to everyone on behalf of everyone at Dragos and myself on behalf of the Cyberwire. Again, thanks for taking the time to join us today. And we hope we see you all again real soon. Stay safe out there, everybody. Thanks again.
Thank you, everybody.